It's not as good as Terminator 2. A phrase that fans of the franchise say every time a new Terminator movie comes out, even if it's passable. Even the biggest fans of this series can agree that something is missing from the Terminator franchise, and it's certainly not action, time travel, or even Arnie. What's missing? Why haven't we had a classic, must-see Terminator movie since the 90s? At its core, the Terminator is a horror movie. The two best movies in the series lean heavy on their horror elements. The dread of being a soft, fleshy being against an unstoppable metal machine. The total obliteration of all life when Judgment Day inevitably comes. The onward march of technological advancement at the cost of human life. Losing control of that tech advancement and knowing that it can think and learn better than a human ever could. The incomprehensible, unimaginable horror of an AI mind that's become self-aware. The Terminator is future tech horror, and that's the key ingredient that's sorely missing from later entries in the series. Recent movies have neglected horror elements in favor of indulging the John and Sarah Connor mythology, getting in the weeds with time travel, and trying in vain to top the action set pieces from Terminator 2. This series needs more horror. Cold as steel take, the first Terminator is a horror classic. Duh, I don't need to tell you that, you clicked on a video about the Terminator series. But what if I told you that T2 retains a lot of the same horror elements, and that's exactly why it's also a classic, among other reasons. What kind of horror is it though? What is the movie scared of, and what scares the audience about Terminator? Robots with guns are pretty scary, but if that's all it takes, then the droids from the Star Wars prequels would be terrifying too. No, there's a lot more to Terminator than just evil robot. The Terminator represents a fear of tech, sure, but more than that, it's a fear of the future, a fear of the man-made apocalypse. That fear is conveyed through body horror and the incompetence of trusted authority figures. Pop culture meme aside,
I'll be back.
Arnie's T-800 is really scary. His accent and performance evokes a being that is foreign in a primal way, something other with a human mask. As the movie goes on, his human surface begins to physically fail. The corny 80s effects evoke a sense of the uncanny valley. He appears very nearly human, but just off enough to cause our human instincts to recoil. This sure wouldn't work if the effects were top-notch, because it's the subtle jank that sends a chill down your spine. It's the human figure violated and twisted into something else. The way he operates on himself is an uncomfortable sight, a sort of robotic self-harm that further violates the human body. It feels nothing, and it has no regard for the form it takes. Not to mention, this thing is unstoppable. The Terminator bulldozes through every person, every structure, every social norm in its way. A gun can't stop him, strategy can't stop him, cops can't stop him. They don't even believe he's real. He can't be reasoned with. The Terminator is utterly unfeeling, unstoppable, and his goal? It's not world domination or money. It's not even to enjoy inflicting pain. It doesn't enjoy that. He'll crush everything just to get to you, or your stand-in for the story, Sarah Connor. Again, pop culture meme of Sarah Connor being a badass aside, she is incredibly vulnerable throughout this first movie. Yes, she overcomes that vulnerability, but until that point, she's just a young service worker being hunted down by the future for something she hasn't done yet, for someone who doesn't even exist yet. Something that isn't her fault. She doesn't deserve the cards she's dealt, but there's no justice in the world to help her with what she's facing. That's horrifying. All of that, the uncanny valley, the unstoppable evil, fear of the future, and the injustice of authority is present and elevated in the sequel, T2 Judgment Day. Sarah Connor in T2 is even more so someone who is failed by her authority figures. In the first movie, they're just ignorant cops and a psychologist who doubts that her fears are legitimate. In T2, these same authority figures are responsible for her institutionalization. This is the horror of being told that your experienced fears are illegitimate. This is the horror of those in charge of protecting you cause your suffering. The horror that those in charge are letting the future go to hell. This idea goes even further when the T-1000 takes the form of the only person in our society who has the power to murder civilians without consequences. He takes the shape of a police officer, a social role that permits murder and torture without question. That's terrifying. A brilliant strategic move for one who plans to murder without consequences, because that's the only societal role that enables a regular human being to murder another. A horror that is still relevant today, and relevant so long as police have the funding that allows them to murder without consequence. T2 is known as the greatest action movie of all time, but in my opinion, it's more horrific than most horror movies that have been released since then. In addition to being a horror movie about the abuse of authority, it's a horror movie about the impending danger of nuclear annihilation. The imagery of the bomb going off, destroying all life on the playground while Sarah Connor, a parent, can do nothing but watch. The total annihilation of everyone, especially the next generation. T2 is known as an action movie, but this is horror imagery, and this is at the crux of this character's motivation and development. Speaking of children, the central character of T2 is one of the most vulnerable members of society. John Connor is just a kid and he's failed by just about everyone who is supposed to be keeping him safe. To add to that, he's got to accept that his future is already lost and that his dangerous, paranoid mother is actually right about the world. That's a lot of scary shit, and it's even scarier because it's all on the shoulders of a little kid. The body horror and unstoppable power of the Terminator is even stronger in T2. This monster can take the form of any object, any person that it comes into contact with. He could be anywhere and is basically unkillable. All you can do is run, but he'll always catch up. The way he kills his prey with blunt weapons and sharp daggers, it's up close and personal, but also detached from humanity. The T-1000 is one of the greatest horror villains of all time. Yes, T2 is an action movie, but it's scary as hell because it relies heavily on the horror elements that were established in the first film. Its reputation as one of the greatest action movies of all time resulted in sequels leaving the horror elements by the wayside in favor of trying to outdo the action. The thing is though, the action from T2 is hard if not impossible to outdo, so you end up getting sequels that just deliver a lesser movie than T2 every time. And it's like all those sequels are missing the fact that it's not action alone that made it a classic. The horror elements heighten the tension of every action scene. Without those horror elements, all the Terminator sequels since have been focused on chase scenes with trucks, or John Connor's destiny, or time traveling as much as possible. Without the horror heart of the franchise, these movies fall flat. I will say, there's some excellent little bits of body horror in both Terminator Salvation and Terminator Dark Fate, but it's just not enough or nearly as much as the first two Terminator movies. It's inevitable that we'll see another Terminator sequel, but it can't just be another fast-paced time travel action romp. We've seen that over and over again. The next Terminator movie needs to be a horror movie. My pitch is drop the lore, drop John Connor's destiny, time travel as little as possible, or don't do it at all. The nature of this franchise as it stands due to time travel is that the lore ultimately doesn't matter and it can be changed. All of those elements have made this series so messy, so take it back to basics. Scary artificial intelligence, vulnerable kid, create horror using the uncanny valley, the threat of nuclear annihilation, untrustworthy authority figures, the violation of the human body. Take the horror elements of the first two Terminator movies and apply them to a modern Terminator movie. I imagine this modern Terminator horror movie would take place right around the time of the Singularity. There's an AI that communicates through a video feed, something like GPT-3. GPT-3 is already creepy as hell. You can't tell what it's thinking, if it's thinking, or if it's just impersonating human qualities. Do that, but with an AI in a Terminator movie. Its powers can include influencing people to be violent through fake news and sabotaging enemies with deepfakes, deploy militaries, weapons, even a few prototype Terminators that maybe look like the Boston Dynamics robots or something similar. Lean into the Lovecraftian, unimaginable horror of the machine mind. How does AI think once it reaches this level of advancement and control? It's something we'll never be able to imagine, and that's pretty scary. I'd make the main character a kid because kids are vulnerable and nobody believes them. And it would harken back to John Connor's role in T2 without getting bogged down in his destiny. Maybe the kid's parent works a low-level job at the company that is developing the AI, and after witnessing something that they shouldn't have, the early Terminator AI kills the parent and goes after the kid. Because of the artificial intelligence's far reach, it can watch its target from anywhere, use things like security cameras, drones, cell phones to create tension and make the protag increasingly paranoid. A big modern fear is the way our technology keeps track of us. Have this happen literally, a main character who is stalked by tech, influenced by it, and put in danger. Aesthetically, the movie should be cold and blue, with neon accents and lasers. Pretty much just like the look of the first two movies. Cold and futuristic with bold red highlights. I am not a fan of the brown and yellow aesthetic of some of the modern Terminator movies. This should be neo-noir, lots of strong shadows and cool vibes. Also, more lasers. I don't care if that's not accurate to weaponry in this day and age or in the near future. It's a good look that can differentiate this franchise from other evil robot movies. It shouldn't look like every other action movie. It should look and feel like the Terminator. There's a lot of room to turn this franchise into one that reflects modern fears about technology. Fears of the technology that governs our lives, fear of what the future holds, fear of violent revolution. And if this first entry takes place just before the singularity, there's room for sequels that follow up with the formation of the human resistance. Imagine that, a neo-noir horror Terminator trilogy that takes place during and immediately after the singularity. There is so much untapped horror potential to the Terminator franchise. This series has gotten fixated on the mythos of Sarah and John Connor, time travel, and big action set pieces in industrial settings. But what about the neo-noir horror that started it all? The imagery of human skulls crushed beneath a red-eyed robot, being chased by a murderer through a dark nightclub, the fear of being hunted by something that looks human but isn't. The Terminator series needs to go back to those horror roots. It'll be fresh, but entirely in line with the first two classic movies. Mr. James Cameron, sir. Can I call you Jim? My name is Greg. I'm a young Canadian filmmaker like you once were. I know you're still somewhat involved in this franchise. I'd love to talk. If you've made it this far, you might like one of my other videos on the topic of horror. I'll include a playlist somewhere around here or a link on the screen. Definitely check it out. Hit that subscribe button if you want more, and let me know what you thought down below. Big thank you to Caleb Mayer, Greta Harris, Jack Hussey, and executive producer Jaime Cadena.